In 1850, this bird waste was worth more than pure gold. Wars were fought, nations fell. Empires rose on mountains of seabird droppings. This is the incredible true story of the world's most valuable fertilizer. Peru's barren coastline held a secret that would reshape global agriculture forever. For thousands of years, seabirds returned here to nest and feed their young. Generation after generation deposited their waste, creating mountains 200 feet deep. European explorers first noticed the white cliffs but dismissed them as useless rock. Chemists soon discovered this waste contained 15% nitrogen, pure agricultural gold. European soils were exhausted after centuries of farming, desperate for nutrients to revive. Guano promised to restore barren fields and feed the exploding industrial population. Investors went mad for guano. Stocks pushing prices higher than gold or railroads. Ships from every major power converged on Peru, holds empty and captains eager. The voyage took months, sailing around Cape Horn through treacherous, deadly waters. When they finally arrived, the mountains of white gold exceeded their wildest dreams. Mining began immediately, with workers climbing cliffs to fill bags with precious cargo. But guano contained arsenic and mercury, making every breath a poisonous gamble. Chinese laborers were imported by the thousands, promised wages they would never receive. They lived in squalor, breathing toxic dust until their lungs finally gave out. Thousands died mining this white gold, their bodies buried in unmarked, shallow graves. Spain, once ruler of Peru, returned in 1864 to reclaim their lost colony. The Chincha Islands held the richest deposits, making them the ultimate strategic prize. Spanish forces seized the islands, claiming ancient rights over South American territory. Peruvians refused to surrender, launching guerrilla attacks from the harsh, rocky terrain. Spain finally withdrew, but Peru was left weakened and bankrupt from the conflict. Peace returned, but the Guano Wars had only just begun in neighboring lands. Bolivia controlled a narrow strip of coast where new guano deposits were discovered. Chile, hungry for power and resources, eyed Bolivia's guano-rich northern provinces greedily. In 1879, Chile invaded, starting the War of the Pacific at sea. Chile's superior navy blockaded Bolivian ports, starving them into submission within months. Peru honored its alliance, sending troops to defend Bolivian territory against Chilean aggression. At Top Hader, outnumbered Bolivian troops fought to the death against Chilean invaders. Hundreds died for guano that day, their blood soaking into the desert sand. Chile advanced north, capturing guano deposits and nitrate fields one by one. In 1881, Chile captured Lima, Peru's capital, ending organized resistance completely. The Treaty of Ancon gave Chile permanent control of Peru's guano-rich southern provinces. Bolivia lost its coastline entirely, becoming landlocked and dependent on Chilean ports forever. 5,000 died in the war, all for control of bird droppings. While soldiers died, guano merchants became some of the richest men in history. William Meigs built a $10 million fortune, equivalent to $300 million today. He built a 5,000-foot pier to load guano, faster than any competitor worldwide. Corruption ran rampant, with Peruvian officials selling guano rights for personal bribes. Despite guano wealth, Peru went bankrupt in 1876 from corrupt mismanagement. Britain seized control of Peruvian finances, ensuring guano profits flowed to London banks. The miners saw none of this wealth, working until death for pennies daily. When slavery ended, plantation owners simply sent their former slaves to mine guano instead. The coolie trade brought thousands of Chinese workers, most dying within 5 years. Some workers rebelled, escaping into the desert or fighting back against their oppressors. Rebellion was crushed brutally, with public whippings to terrify other workers into submission. The islands were stripped bare, destroying the seabird colonies that had existed for millennia. Germany, dependent on imported guano, desperately sought a way to make their own fertilizer. Fritz Haber, a brilliant chemist, dedicated his life to pulling nitrogen from the air. In 1909, Haber succeeded, creating synthetic ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen gas. The Haber-Bosch Process scaled this to industrial levels, producing unlimited synthetic fertilizer. When synthetic fertilizer hit the market, guano prices crashed overnight to almost nothing. The guano empire collapsed instantly, leaving ghost towns and ruined fortunes across Peru. Guano barons lost everything, their paper fortunes worthless as the market evaporated completely. The surviving Chinese laborers finally returned home, carrying trauma and stories of horror. Peru slowly recovered, learning harsh lessons about dependence on a single natural resource. The islands healed over decades, with seabirds slowly returning to their ancestral nesting grounds. Today, synthetic fertilizer feeds half the world, all thanks to Haber's deadly invention. Haber also created chemical weapons, winning a Nobel Prize while causing millions of deaths. Synthetic fertilizer enabled the population explosion from 2 billion to 8 billion people. Guano still exists as a niche organic fertilizer, harvested sustainably from protected islands. Peru now protects these islands, recognizing their ecological value beyond mere fertilizer profits. The Guano Wars teach us that resource greed inevitably leads to conflict and suffering. Today we fight over lithium and cobalt, repeating the same tragic patterns of exploitation. Yesterday's guano is today's lithium. What resource will tomorrow's wars be fought over? Understanding history helps us choose differently. Will we learn from the Guano Wars? The Guano Wars remind us that today's treasure often becomes tomorrow's forgotten tragedy. Before guano, European agriculture faced collapse from centuries of overfarming and soil exhaustion. Justus von Liebig's research proved nitrogen was essential for plant growth and survival. Humboldt's South American expeditions first brought guano samples to European scientists. The first guano shipment reached London in 1840, sparking immediate agricultural interest. Field tests showed miraculous results, with guano-fed crops growing twice as fast. Hull, the Royal Agricultural Society, declared guano the greatest agricultural discovery of the century. Newspapers spread the word, creating a frenzy for this white gold from Peru. American farmers soon demanded guano, creating a transatlantic race for supply. Prices doubled yearly, with guano soon worth more than gold by weight. Ship designers created faster clippers specifically to win the guano trade race. William Meigs arrived in Peru with nothing but ambition and a nose for profit. He spent months studying the coastline, identifying the richest guano deposits available. Meigs secured exclusive mining rights through generous payments to Peruvian officials. His 5,000-foot pier was the largest wooden structure in South America. The pier could load 20 ships simultaneously, making Meigs the guano king. By 1870, Meigs controlled half of Peru's guano exports personally. But success bred overexpansion, and Meigs's empire collapsed with the guano market. William Meigs died bankrupt in 1877, his pier already rotting away. Chinese labor recruiters promised gold mountains but delivered only suffering and death. The voyage killed many before they even reached the Guano Islands of Peru. Upon arrival, they learned their contracts were worthless and escape impossible. Workers climbed 200 feet up bamboo ladders, carrying 80-pound baskets daily. The dust destroyed their lungs, with most dying within 3 years of arrival. Some planned escape into the desert, preferring death to continued slavery in mines. Desert escape attempts rarely succeeded, with most captured or dying of thirst. Public whippings terrorized others into submission, breaking the spirit of resistance. Over 5,000 Chinese workers died anonymous deaths on Peru's Guano Islands. Abolition simply moved former slaves from plantations to equally deadly guano mines. Afro-Peruvian former slaves joined Chinese laborers in the deadly White Cliffs. Children as young as 10 worked alongside. Adults, their childhoods stolen by greed. Spain's fleet arrived in 1864, determined to reclaim their lost South American empire. Spanish commanders believed Peru would surrender immediately to European military superiority. President Peza refused surrender, rallying Peruvians to defend their national honor. Peruvian fortifications at Callao proved stronger than Spanish commanders expected. Spanish casualties mounted, proving reconquest would cost more than anticipated. The United States and Britain threatened intervention, demanding equal guano access. Spain withdrew in 1866, humiliated by unexpectedly fierce Peruvian resistance. Victory left Peru bankrupt, with independence preserved but economy destroyed. As guano ran out, nitrates discovered in Bolivia's Atacama Desert became the new prize. Chilean leaders decided northern expansion was essential for national economic survival. Bolivia's attempt to tax Chilean companies triggered the inevitable conflict. In February 1879, Chile invaded Bolivia by land and sea simultaneously. President Daza led his army personally, but incompetence doomed Bolivian resistance. At Tepater, Bolivian cavalry charged into machine gun fire, dying by hundreds. Tepater destroyed Bolivia's army, leaving Peru to fight alone against Chile. Peru honored its alliance with Bolivia, entering a war it was unprepared to win. The naval battle of Iquique made Captain Prat a martyr and national hero. Chile's naval victory established blockade, isolating Peru from outside aid. Chilean troops landed in Peru's northern desert, facing harsh conditions and determined resistance. The brutal Battle of Tacna destroyed Peru's field army, opening the path to Lima. As Chilean troops advanced, Peruvian civilians fled toward Lima seeking safety. Civilian militia joined regular troops in desperate but futile defense of Lima. Lima's fall ended organized resistance, but guano's value had already peaked. The Treaty of Ancon gave Chile nitrate-rich territories, completing the resource transfer. Bolivia lost its coastline forever, becoming permanently dependent on Chilean ports. 35,000 died, mostly from disease and desert conditions, not combat. Defeated Peru faced economic collapse without guano wealth to finance recovery. Victorious Chile gained nitrate wealth, but at enormous social and moral cost. While wars raged over guano, Fritz Haber quietly studied nitrogen in German laboratories. Years of failed experiments tested Haber's resolve, but persistence eventually paid off. In 1909, success came suddenly, with ammonia dripping from his apparatus. Engineer Carl Bosch scaled Haber's discovery into industrial production by 1913. Synthetic fertilizer ended dependence on guano, making natural deposits nearly worthless. Haber also invented chemical weapons, creating the horrors of gas warfare. Haber won the Nobel Prize in 1918, celebrated for feeding the world. Synthetic fertilizer helped feed post-war Europe, beginning the population explosion. Haber died in exile in 1934, his legacy forever morally complicated. By 2000, synthetic fertilizer helped feed 6 billion people globally. But fertilizer runoff created ocean-dead zones, proving every solution has new problems. Modern organic farming has created new demand for sustainably harvested guano. Peru's Guano Islands are now protected reserves, managed for ecological sustainability. Strict quotas rotate between islands, allowing bird populations to recover naturally. Organic guano commands premium prices again, but this time with sustainable harvesting. The same islands that fueled 19th century greed now demonstrate conservation success. Memorials now honor the thousands of Chinese workers who died anonymous deaths. Peruvian schools now teach guano history, ensuring future generations remember the costs. Today's lithium mining in the same Atama Desert shows eerily similar patterns. Cobalt mining in Congo repeats the same exploitation for today's battery technology. Rare earth processing in China creates environmental destruction for our consumer electronics. The global north still extracts resources from the south, repeating colonial economics. Climate change is opening the Arctic to new resource extraction, repeating old patterns. Deep-sea mining proposals threaten unknown ecosystems, ignoring guano-era lessons. Space mining advocates use the same infinite resource rhetoric that drove guano exploitation. Our daily devices connect us to exploitation we rarely see or consider. Corporate accounting still externalizes environmental and human costs, just as in guano era. International law remains too weak to prevent resource exploitation across borders. Indigenous communities still bear the costs of resource extraction on their lands. Worker exploitation continues in global supply chains, hidden from consumer view. The same short-term thinking that destroyed Guano Islands now threatens global ecosystems. But renewable energy and circular economies offer hope for breaking historical patterns. Growing consumer demand for ethical products can drive corporate behavior change. Corporate sustainability reporting, though imperfect, represents progress from guano-era secrecy. International climate agreements, though weak, show attempts at global resource governance. Modern technology enables supply chain transparency impossible in the guano era. Education about history like the Guano Wars empowers citizens to demand change. Indigenous land rights movements have achieved protections impossible in the guano era. Youth climate activism shows new generations may break historical exploitation patterns. Peru's protected Guano Islands prove that sustainable resource management is possible. Our daily choices about consumption collectively shape whether history repeats or changes. Understanding the Guano Wars helps us recognize and resist similar exploitation today. Electric vehicles reduce carbon emissions but require lithium with similar extraction costs. The green energy transition requires massive mineral extraction, but we can improve practices. Advanced recycling can reduce primary extraction, breaking the linear consumption model. New battery technologies may reduce dependence on scarce resources like lithium and cobalt. Systemic changes in transportation can reduce overall resource consumption significantly. The sharing economy and product-to-service models can reduce material consumption. Carbon pricing and resource taxes can align economic incentives with ecological limits. Climate change requires international cooperation impossible in the competitive guano era. Democratic pressure from informed citizens can drive the institutional changes needed. Haber's legacy warns that scientific capability without ethical wisdom brings destruction. Modern science has developed ethical review processes absent in Haber's time. The precautionary principle, learned from historical disasters, now guides some policy. Indigenous ecological knowledge offers alternatives to destructive industrial extraction. Rights of nature laws represent fundamental legal evolution since the guano era. Intergenerational ethics challenge us to consider future impacts of our resource use. The Guano Islands recovery proves ecosystems can heal if given proper protection. We share the same planet as the guano era, but can choose different paths. The solutions exist. What remains is the collective will to implement them. Individual choices collectively shape whether we repeat history or write a new story. Sharing knowledge about historical exploitation empowers others to demand change. The Guano Wars ended over a century ago, but their lessons remain urgently relevant. Every product we use connects us to global systems of extraction and labor. We stand at a decision point where we can choose repetition or transformation. The world we create today is the inheritance we leave for future generations, millions worldwide, are already working to create more just and sustainable systems. Recognizing our shared humanity is the first step toward just resource governance. History shows humans can learn, evolve, and create more just societies over time. The guano that once fueled exploitation now symbolizes the possibility of sustainable change. The story of guano is ultimately about humanity's capacity for both destruction and redemption. What we do with this knowledge is the story that future generations will tell. The Chincha Islands remain protected today, located 13 miles off Peru's southern coast. Modern science reveals these islands support incredible marine biodiversity beyond guano value. The Humboldt Current brings nutrients that support the entire marine food web here. Over 4 million seabirds from 7 species nest on these protected islands today. Protection now extends to surrounding marine ecosystems, creating a comprehensive reserve. Controlled ecotourism now generates revenue supporting conservation without resource extraction. International designations recognize these islands as globally significant ecosystems worth protecting. Climate change now threatens these ecosystems, requiring continued vigilance and adaptation. Research your product supply chains, support ethical companies, and demand corporate accountability. Remember the Guano Wars, that we may never repeat their tragic exploitation.